We're going to go ahead and talk about Classically Abby, if that's okay with everybody in the chat. Everybody wants to talk about my allergies now, but instead I want to talk about some weird conservative lady on YouTube. So, if you are an atheist, you generally agree with this premise. The Bible is patriarchal. You know, whether you find yourself on the right side or left side of politics, most people can at least agree, especially if you're not currently beholden to any biblical religion, that the Bible has a very patriarchal bent. Well, Classically Abby apparently sought out to argue against that premise. I'm curious to see how she did. Let's go ahead and take a look. Come on, Abby. Let's talk. Let's talk.
Hello, Classic Crew, and welcome to today's video, where we're going to be talking about 5 women from the Bible who we can learn true strength from.
Okay. Now remember, the title is Think the Bible's Patriarchal, Think Again, but the opening said something a little different to me. To me, that sounded like the opening was going to say, hey, we're going to learn about women who we can learn strength from, which is not necessarily the same thing as the Bible's not patriarchal. So maybe the title's the clickbait, maybe one of these is the wrong premise, I don't know. Let's find out. Neat.
Something that I've always loved about the Bible, which in Hebrew we call the Tanakh, which stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, which in English translates to Torah, Prophets, and Writings, is how amazing the women in it are. They are so layered, they have incredible stories, and they are so strong. Reading the women in the Bible is so inspiring to me.
Okay, so reading the women in the Bible is inspiring to you, and while that could be fair, I do have the question: does this suddenly mean that the Bible's not patriarchal? Like, I have to ask, if the story that you're reading has a strong woman in it, does that suddenly mean that the story is not patriarchal? I'd argue that it doesn't, but again, we'll go ahead and continue on with Abby's video to see exactly what her examples are.
They take initiative. They also do such incredible things for the Jewish people, and I absolutely find inspiration for my own life in reading the Tanakh and reading the Bible. I also want to quickly mention one of my absolute favorite things to read is called Eshet Chayil, which is also known as Proverbs 31, and that is incredibly inspiring to me. And one of the reasons I absolutely love reading Eshet Chayil, which translates to a woman of valor, is that whenever I start to feel insecure about my looks, reading that reminds me of what my role is as a woman and what my role is as a wife, and it really...
Wait, so having a definitive role as a woman and a wife makes you feel like you have strength? Maybe we have different definitions of what patriarchal is. Because from my perspective, telling women that they have a role from a book predominantly written by men feels like that's the very essence of patriarchal. Just saying.
Really is more about being a strong person and a good person, and that is so much more important than what I'm actually looking like. So I absolutely love reading that. But getting back to the point of what this video is about. If you're new to my channel, I'm a religious Jew. I talk about commentary, fashion, beauty, lifestyle, and opera, all from a conservative and classic perspective. And if you think that's something that you would like...
See, this is the problem with me doing these things live. I would probably just cut this part out, because if we're here, you know who Abby is.
To hear more about, feel free to subscribe and join the Classic Crew. But one of the things that really drives me crazy is when people act like religion is patriarchal and oppressive. And if you are more traditional and if you are religious, you have internalized misogyny from the Bible. And
There's a whole bunch of buzzwords there, but that's not... So it's not necessarily untrue, though. See, especially here in the American South, there's a lot of people that believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and therefore you should follow the Bible, and therefore, like, the man is the leader of the household. That is, by definition, patriarchal. Like, whether you think that's a good thing or not, there's no point in time where that is not a patriarchal idea. that stems from the Bible. Like, the book itself is a patriarchal book because it is a book written by men that largely has, or a series of books written by men that largely has women in positions of servitude, women's in positions of vulnerability. There are a handful of times where they have positions of power, but even then, those positions can be colored in a very different way. And a lot of, I mean, hell, my family, one of the reasons that my mom would not leave my stepdad for as long as she did was because he was the leader of the household. He was the patriarch, regardless of the fact that he was abusive, regardless of the fact that he made both of our lives a living hell. He was the man of the household, so he got to make the rules. That was just justification I heard as a kid. So Abby wants to say something like, oh, well, it's not true that this is the case. Well, even if it is true or not, which I believe that it is, people still internalize that. I've lived a childhood with the negative consequences of that kind of thinking. You know, go ahead and tell me that it didn't happen or some shit. I don't know. Let's find out what she has to say.
I hate that. I hate it because it's so not true.
Okay, so you're going to go ahead and pull the it's not true. I believe it is true. You believe it's not true. I can at least take the fact that people can take what they want from the Bible, but if you want to say that it's flatly untrue, we're going to have a problem. But, you know, what are your examples?
Today, I will be sharing with you 5 women that shows how the Bible truly views women and what...
Wait, so you're going to have 5 stories about women in the Bible. You're going to definitionally cherry pick 5 anecdotes to prove that all 66 books in the Bible, each book containing multiple stories, is not patriarchal. This is very flawed methodology. Like, this is very flawed methodology. Just, no.
We as women can learn from them. So let's get into it. The first woman I want to talk about today is Ruth. I love the story of Ruth. I grew up hearing it every year on Shavuos, which is the holiday that celebrates the receiving of the Torah. And so every year we would read Ruth at synagogue. Ruth and her sister Orpah were Moabite princesses, and a Jewish man and his wife and his 2 children moved from Israel, where there was a famine, to Moab because they wanted to escape what was
Hey, found an ad
on there, and that there was not enough food. And while they were there, their sons, the 2 sons, married Ruth and Orpah. After that marriage, the father and the 2 sons passed away. And Naomi turned to her daughters-in-law and she said, you should return to your family. You are still young and you could still be Moabite princesses. This would be better for you to do than what I'm going to do, which is return to Israel. And Orpah said, okay, I love you and I appreciate that, but I'm going to return to my family. And Ruth said, I will be going with you. Ruth accepted Judaism as her own. She said, where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And so she went with Naomi, even though she knew that she was actually going to be taking on a much harder life, given that the 2 of them didn't have any money, and she wasn't going to be a princess, and there was a famine in the land. She still returned with her mother-in-law to Israel. And when they went...
Okay, but none of that so far says that this isn't a patriarchal story. Like, this doesn't suddenly become a story that's not patriarchal merely because you have a woman who is willing to go into a distant land. And if I remember the details of the story of Ruth, I believe this actually turns into a very patriarchal story going forward.
Went there, she needed to gather food for her and her mother-in-law. So she sat down at a field and encountered a man named Boaz, who was actually the owner of the field. And he took an immediate liking to her, and he also taught her many of the rules of Judaism, which are all about charity and all about how he wasn't allowed to collect certain things on his property, so that if he dropped them, for example, while he was collecting grains, he had to leave them there so that the poor and the hungry could collect them for themselves. And Ruth collected so many things.
So wait, the story isn't patriarchal, but the story is about a woman who learns all of the rules for her religion from a man, and then gets to eat because the man accidentally drops grain for her. The story where the power dynamic is completely shifted towards the male, and the woman is having to scrounge by the good graces of the person. This is not a patriarchal story to you?
Because Boaz educated her and told her to take those things for herself. And so when she did, she returned home, and Naomi told her, you should go to Boaz. He clearly likes you. And he also happens to be a familial relation. So at the time, if a woman's husband died, she could marry a familial relation, and that could continue the line of her husband.
So it's not a So wait. It's not a patriarchal story, but the woman has very specific rules over who she's allowed to marry based on the men in her life alone. And they get to write those rules. But it's not a patriarchal story at all. Not according to Abby.
So she went to Boaz and she offered herself to him as a wife. And he said, I would love to marry you. And you are a very good woman, because he was a bit older than she was. And he loved that she was attracted to him, despite the fact that he was a bit older than she was.
So we've got a very massive power dynamic based on age now. Got it.
And he said to her, I would love to marry you, but you do have a closer familial relationship. So I will go.
So she would like to exercise her autonomy as an individual, but she's beholden by a bunch of laws written to favor men, so she can't exercise that autonomy. And so the man gets to decide, no, you can't do this because there's another man you have to go to instead. But this is supposed to not be patriarchal?
Go and talk to that man and see if he would like to marry you first. So Boaz went and he spoke to this other relation. He did
not patriarchal, but you've got to ask the men for permission everywhere. But it's not patriarchal. Nothing about the story is patriarchal, according to Abby. Meanwhile, everything about this story, from having to pick up scraps from a man, getting your education from a man, being beholden to the rules that favor men, having to ask a particular man if you can marry another man, all of that is literally a woman beholden to men. That is patriarchal. That is definitionally that. Abby, do you know what words mean? Do you know? I don't think you know.
Not want to marry Ruth, and Boaz and Ruth got married, and they were very happy. And from their line came King David. And King David, of course, is an...
So her life is important because she was beholden to a man, got educated by a man, had to ask a man who she could marry, and then because she had sex with a man, she got to birth an important man. But it's not patriarchal. This is the face of a liar.
An incredibly important figure in Judaism and in Christianity. They were the great-grandparents of David, in fact. And one of the really cool things about the story is, number one, that there is an entire book just about a woman.
Yeah, about a woman being beholden to men, therefore still patriarchal.
Now, you can talk about the fact that you might think that the Bible and that religious texts are patriarchal, but there are entire books in the Tanakh, another one which I will mention also, that are titled after women, that are about women. So just because the title has a woman in it, you literally get to just judge the book by its cover, but when the contents of the book argue completely against your premise, you have to rely on the efficacy of the title. The title is what you get to work with. Abby, this is not good methodology. This is not a premise that anyone should ever accept on any college assignment. Being heroines. And Ruth is the heroine of the story. And the reason
she's the heroine of the story that gets saved by men and births a man, and that's what makes her important. No, she may be the protagonist, but she's not the heroine.
Her story is so important is because she's a convert, and through her line, King David came. And the reason I think that's so important to remember is that Ruth accepted the Jewish people as her nation, and she accepted the Jewish God as her God. And it didn't matter that she wasn't born Jewish. Converting is about accepting the...
How does any of that have anything to do with patriarchy? You're just, you're happy that a person converted to your religion in a story. Okay.
community and accepting your religion and accepting your faith. And that is what's important about being a Jew. And it doesn't matter if you were born Jewish. If you accept your role as a Jew as part of the community and accept God as your God and the laws as your laws, that's what matters. And I love that, especially even the fact that the Moabites were a distinct enemy of the Jews. And again, it has nothing to do with the ethnicity of the Moabites.
None of this has anything to do with your premise now, Abby. This is all fluff. This is functionally all fluff. None of this has anything to do with what you were actually talking about, which is whether the Bible's patriarchal. You've given us a story that is a blatantly patriarchal story, and you've accepted the premise that it's not because the story is named after the woman? And now you're just talking about how great it is that she just happens to share a religion with you? Abby, none of this matters in regards to your premise, in regards to your thesis. The thesis of this video, the conceit of this video, is supposed to be that these women will change your mind about the Bible being patriarchal. Your first person did not. Can we get to your second one?
Because King David's ancestor was technically a Moabite. But it didn't matter because she was a Jew, because she accepted Judaism. But she left everything she knew behind to pursue a faith that mattered to her, to pursue her beliefs, and to stay with her mother-in-law and respect her. And that is so inspiring, that she left everything she knew for her faith. Number 2 is the story of Esther. So I've read Esther every year during Purim, which is a holiday where we celebrate that the Jews were not destroyed by Ahasuerus and Haman, who were of the Persian Empire. And Esther is an incredible figure in Jewish history. In the story of Esther, Haman is the henchman of the king Ahasuerus, and he hates the Jews. He hates them because a man named Mordecai wouldn't bow to him. Everyone else will bow to him, but Mordecai will not. And Mordecai is Esther's uncle. And Haman comes to the king and tells him he wants an edict to kill all of the Jews on a certain day. And Ahasuerus agrees. Ahasuerus is also at the same time looking for a queen to replace the queen he murdered, he did not like.
So wait. So far, we have another story where all of the power players are men, and it's a story that so far is leaning into needing a woman to fulfill the role of wife. But this one's also supposed to not be patriarchal?
And he wants a new queen. And Esther does not want to marry him, but she's beautiful, and he loves her, and he falls in love with her immediately, and she becomes his queen. And Mordecai...
Not a patriarchal story, but the woman's autonomy is ignored so that she can be forced to marry off to a man. Not a patriarchal story, though. Couldn't be.
Tells her, don't tell him that you're Jewish. You have an opportunity here. It's possible that you will need to be in this position in the future. So Esther hides her identity, and when she finds out that the Jews are to be destroyed, she comes to the king without permission, which was not allowed in that time, and he allows her to come in, and she invites him to dinner. During that dinner, he offers her half of his kingdom. She says no, but she invites him to another dinner, and this time she asks him to bring Haman. When Haman comes into their second dinner, Ahasuerus again offers Esther half of his kingdom, and she says no, but she says what she does want is for him to save her people and her.
So, not a patriarchal story, but the power player is the man, and the woman is having to beg the man repeatedly to not kill her people, and she's having to go do it through essentially manipulation, which has repeatedly been a coded trait in literature that's given to either servants or women when they can't give them blatant power. Because, again, patriarchal. But this is not supposed to be a patriarchal story. Abby, I'm not 100% certain you know what words mean. I said it before, I'll say it again. This is very confusing.
And Ahasuerus is very confused because he doesn't know that Esther is Jewish. So she explains that Haman is trying to kill her people and in turn killing the queen. And Ahasuerus comes to her and he says, well, I can't reverse my edict, but I can allow the Jews to fight back, because the edict was that all of the neighboring peoples would be allowed to kill the Jews. And they fight back, and the Jews are saved. And because of Esther's bravery, the Jewish people survived.
So you're saying they wouldn't have been able to fight back without her asking a man for permission? Abby, are you okay? Do you know what patriarchy is? Is this the face of someone who knows what patriarchy is? Look. Maybe we should have a defined word, okay? Here. Let's go ahead and do it. Patriarchy. A system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family and descent is traced through the male line. A society that is organized on patriarchal lines, in which case it favors the men, or a system or society in which men hold power and women are largely excluded from it. So, in this story, only the men held power. The decisions only got to be made by men. The women, the one woman, mind you, had to manipulate her way into the stage so as to use the power that was controlled by the man. And yet, you think this isn't patriarch. You think this isn't patriarchal. I'm not trying to be like the bleeding heart feminist during all of this. I'm just trying to look at this objectively.
Esther is so incredible. She lives as a secret agent, essentially, in the king's castle as the queen.
Cool. And all of her power is an extension of the man's. I'm not saying that it couldn't be considered a cool story. It's still patriarchal, though. Definitionally.
Hiding her identity till the moment is right so that she can save the Jews. And she knows what she has to do, and that is to save her people. And I can't read that story without thinking about how inspiring that is, that she was in the most adverse of situations, and she still was able to save the people, and she still put her people and her faith before herself.
So, she doesn't get to put herself as an individual above others? This is a pro-woman story? Okay. You're stretching hard here.
And that is something I think we can look at every day for inspiration. And you can look at this and think to yourself, the women in biblical literature are not weak. They're not controlled by others.
She was literally controlled by others. All of her power came as an extension of a man's pre-existing power. Her ability to save people came only as an extension of a man's will. That is definitionally patriarchal. Doesn't mean she's not a cool character. Doesn't mean she's not a character that you can't look up to. Like, something not being patriarchal doesn't just mean that cool women aren't in it. You can still have cool women in something that is still very patriarchal. The structure of that story shows that all the power players were men. And I'm repeating myself now, because you're fluffing this up so much. I'm also concerned. There's only 5 minutes left in her video, and she's only gone into 2 people? It's a 15-minute video. These next stories better be very, very short.
They're not oppressed. They are strong.
She was literally oppressed. Both Esther and Ruth were literally oppressed in their stories. One of them even had to survive off of essentially table scraps being dropped by a guy on accident. What?
Strong, independent women. And it's so important for us to look to them for guidance. Number 3 is Deborah or Deborah. Deborah is written of in prophets, and she was a leader of the Jewish people. She was a female judge and a prophetess, and she was the one who beat Yavin, who was the king of Canaan and who had oppressed the Jewish people for many, many years. She sent a message to a man named Barak to gather 10,000 troops and have them go to Mount Tabor. The leader.
So this sounds like this might be the first story that is not a patriarchal one, maybe.
The leader of Yavin's army is named Sisera, and he brought his troops to the river below, and Deborah and Barak defeated him. And after that, there were 40 years of peace in the land. She was also a mother and a wife. Deborah is an incredible figure. She was a female judge, and you would think at that period of time that there would not be female judges or female prophets. And she was. She was a prophetess, she was a judge, and she was a mother and a wife. She was so strong, and she knew what the Jewish people needed, and she accomplished it. And it's an incredible thing to see that the Bible, the Tanakh, writes about a woman in a position of power who accomplishes so much. And she also does it while being a wife and a mother.
So you've got one. I'm actually impressed. Based on the way you've portrayed the story, you've got one. And that's more than I expected. Also, these pause screens are horrible. All of them.
I honestly can't think of anything more inspiring than that. Deborah is an incredibly inspiring woman in the Bible, and if you want to think that God is oppressive or patriarchal, why would he give the gift of prophecy to a woman? And
wait. No, that's not a gotcha, Abby. You were doing so well. A leader of any kind can be oppressive, can be sexist, can be racist, and still have a female friend or a black friend or what have you. You literally just made the argument, if God's sexist, why he have female friend? This is the exact same thing as when somebody says they're not racist because they have a black friend, but they're still willing to engage in practically every form of racial bias. I'm sorry, Abby, that's not a good gotcha. It's just not.
And why would she be in a position of power as a judge? Number 4 is Yael. So Yael is in the same story, actually, as Deborah and Barak, and she is the one who kills Sisera. So Sisera arrives at her husband's home. Her husband doesn't really have any fight with Yavin or with Sisera. He doesn't care, despite the fact that Yavin and Sisera have been oppressing Jews all over the country. And she feels sympathy for the Jews. So when Sisera arrived at her husband's tent, Yael invited him into her own tent, and when he asked for water, she gave him milk. And as he fell asleep, she took a stake from the tent and drove it through his temple and instantly killed him. And that gave her the credit of defeating Yavin's army. Yael took action against a man who had oppressed the Jews for many years, and she knew that she needed to defeat him in this way. And she did it. Not a man, not anyone else. She did it. She took matters into her own hands.
But the way in which she had to do it was as exactly as you would classically expect. This is one of those ones that I'd say is more of a draw, because it's not so much that it's not patriarchal because a woman did something cool, and it's not so much that it's patriarchal because a man was the one involved in the oppression. There's a weird middle ground here, because while she did take action, and that is good, and that's a wonderful thing, the way in which she had to do so in the narrative required manipulation, which in stories like this is generally coded to be a female tool, in the same way that power is coded to be a male tool in a lot of these things. It's not all the time. It's not always a 100% functional litmus test, but a lot of literature around this time did work in that way. Even going later into stuff like what was written by Shakespeare, you have lords and nobles who have to be defeated by servants because the servants are sly. They are manipulators. They're able to do things that they couldn't do with raw power. This is the tool that you give narratively to someone who is coded to be weaker than their antagonist. So I would call this one a draw. You've got one, you failed at 2, this one is at least a little bit of a sweet spot between. It's not, at least based on your reading of this, maybe my memory of this is very off, but I'm going with your reading of this.
And she took
advertisements.
Action. And she was such a strong woman in that moment, and she saved many Israelites in the process. I also want to mention that on Rosh Hashanah, when we blow the shofar, we actually do 100 different sounds to represent the 100 cries of Sisera's mother, because we recognize that even though Sisera was an evil man, he was still someone's child. So we don't take that stuff lightly, but it is something that Yael is still considered a hero and a heroine for her act. The last person I want to talk about today is Yehudit. Now, Yehudit is not technically in the Bible, but her story takes place during the Maccabean revolt. She took...
So wait, her story's not technically in the Bible, but your premise of the video is that the Bible isn't patriarchal. I think this one's just going to be a miss based on technicality. If you're going to try to make the conceit that the Bible isn't patriarchal, but then bring somebody in who's not in the Bible, at least according to you, that's going to create a problem. But we'll continue on.
The Bible, but her story takes place during the Maccabean revolt. She took inspiration from Yael. When the Jews were under siege by Holofernes, she took action so that the Jews would survive. He decided to starve the inhabitants of the city, and they were very close to giving in, to giving themselves up to his army. And Yehudit said to the commanders, "Let me take inspiration from Yael. I will go to Holofernes, and I will do something similar to what Yael did, and I will save the people of this city." Yehudit went to Holofernes. She told him that she could give him information about what was going on in the city. Eventually, he began to trust her, and one evening when he believed that they were about to take the city, she came into him and gave him wine and cheese, and he fell asleep. After he fell asleep, she took his sword and she chopped off his...
So wait, again, we have a woman who, instead of having power, is having to exercise manipulation because all the power players in her story are men. Also, Yehudit, or also the Book of Judith. The reason this is not technically in the Bible, it's what's called a deuterocanonical book. It's something that would be included in the Septuagint and the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christian Old Testament. But that's an aside thing. The important thing here is that even though you have another story about a woman, the people who have power, the people who have the ability to do anything, the movers and shakers of the world in this story, none of them are women. They're men in this particular story. And her goal is to use her feminine wiles to manipulate a man so that she can kill him. It's amazing how many women you find inspiring based on their ability to kill a man in their sleep, too. I'm just going to go ahead and say that maybe your husband should be a little concerned about that. Maybe he shouldn't aspire to any political power, let's say. You know, just in case. But all that to say, Abby, your definition of what is patriarchal and not patriarchal is very, very lacking. Because all of the examples that you've given, everything that you have handed to us here for us to analyze, have been 3 stories where all the movers and shakers are men, making them very patriarchal stories in their own right. The only way that the women were able to manage things was either by getting table scraps from the men or manipulating them into being able to kill them in their sleep. You have one story which was, in fact, about a very powerful woman who got to be the protagonist and the mover and shaker and everything in her story. And then you had a story that was somewhere weird in the middle where technically it wasn't patriarchal, but at the same time, you still had classically feminine-coded things being used as the weapons of the woman here. Again, I have to iterate this. It's very strange to me that the most inspiring people to you are people who've managed to sneak in and kill men in their sleep. So, yeah, final score, 1.5 out of 5. You had 5 people to support your thesis, and you have a 1.5 out of 5. That's a failure to me. That's a failure in my book, Abby. I am surprised, though. You did better than I thought. You did at least have 1. And that's, honestly, that's enough in some cases. I'm surprised that the 1 was there in the first place, but I'm glad that there was at least 1 woman in the Bible that you had here that supported your thesis. Proud of that. It's still a failure, though. But what do you think? If you're in the comments section below, please let me know what your assessment of this little project of hers has been. I know what mine is. I've given my opinion. But as always, everyone, if you enjoyed the video, please let me know in the comment section below. Please leave me a comment down there letting me know what your thoughts are. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to support my channel, what I do, and also help me feed Growlithe when she tries to eat my shoes, then maybe check out Patreon and other links down below. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.